When we started writing our thoughts down on paper, it opened up endless possibilities. Ideas could grow beyond the borders of the mind, and it changed the world. Somewhere along the way, we lost touch with paper, distracted by devices made for every purpose except for thinking and focus. On edge, waiting for the next notification. But what if new technology didn't pull us away from paper, but brought us closer to it? Listen. That's not paper. It's the sound of the new Remarkable Paper Pro, rewriting the future. A paper tablet with a true color ink display, gentle reading light, and unheard of tactility. With digital features for taking notes, thinking, and organizing, without any distractions. Paper is about to change the world again. Get your paper tablet at remarkable.com today.
What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. I'm going to cut out the normal lengthy bio and just say, first and foremost, I am a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. I've also been blessed to be a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. Getting into today's episode, I want to start with something deeper. Again, I said with God at the center. I don't apologize for that. Jesus often went out into the wilderness to be alone. I think that's good for a man, to get out in the wilderness and be alone. Now's a good time of year, maybe depending on where you live, but in a lot of places in the northern hemisphere, right now is a good time to get out and get some solitude, get a little wild. Depending on the translation, it'll often say Jesus went out into the desert to play, or out into the deserted places, or out into the wilderness. It's a balance, right? He would go into the cities where the people were to preach to them, to save souls. And he would go out to be alone in the wilderness. He's my example. I like getting out into the wilderness. Even though I live large chunks of our life, my wife and I live as neo-nomads, living off-grid. And off-grid's a sliding scale. Even from that, I like to remove myself and get out into the wilderness. Recently did that on a 2-day trip. If you want to hear more about that, there's an episode on that. It shouldn't be too far back in the feed. And that's the feed on Alpha Male Podcast. If you just listen to Gunfighter Life, I would encourage you to check out Alpha Male Podcast for hopefully content you will really enjoy and find beneficial, other than just the gun stuff. The Backcountry Bug Out After Action Report. But in that exercise, and it's by no means the first time I've done stuff like this, but I had an interesting idea for a kind of lesser talked about, thought about, useful survival firearm. And that's a camp carbine. A camp rifle. And I'm going to lay down kind of the idea behind that. Now, I took a 22 on this expedition because it was mostly just going to be a backcountry bug out exercise. A few objectives. Number one, I wanted to be alone in the wilderness. Like God, like Jesus did. 2, I wanted to do a pretty long, hard bug out exercise for the sake of that. Also, by God's grace, hopefully soon we'll be going to Alaska, and I plan to do quite a bit of hunting in Alaska, and I wanted to get in shape and test out the pack and the gear and everything that I had pretty much packed up for Alaska in that. Also, the cardiovascular and benefits, health and mental benefits of ruck marching. And also to get good content for you guys, and hopefully you enjoy that content. And this is some more of that. In that, now let me be clear, I didn't kill all these animals because it would be illegal. It would be malum prohibitum. Not malum in se, I don't think, evil by nature, but malum prohibitum. I mean, the government says that only on these times and only if you pay this certain amount of money can you shoot a magistrate's animals or catch the magistrate's fish or whatever you want to call it. They view it that it need their permission or whatever to kill animals and take fish or whatever. And you can deep dive into that, whether you think that's right or not. But that's the case, and since I'm not a resident here anymore, I used to be, and I'm up in northern Idaho on the Montana border. But anyway, the out-of-state licenses here are pretty spendy, and most things are out of season. But I went out hiking, and I'm big on dry firing. I'm big on doing that, and I've preached this before about dry firing as hunting without hunting. Like if you're out and you see an animal, dry fire on it. You're not hurting the animal. You're not alarming the animal. The animal probably won't even know. And if you're good, and this is an intermediate to advanced skill, if you can call your shots, bringing you back to a competition experience, if you can run a plate rack and before you even hear the sound of that bullet hitting that plate, you know that was a bad shot and you make it up. That's the ability to call your shots and to know whether you would have hit something or missed something. Calling your shots. And if you can call your shots, you can reasonably say, if you know ballistics and data, that, yeah, I could have taken that animal. I did that on this trip. I brought a .22 because I knew I wasn't actually going to be taking a bunch of game because, again, malum prohibitum. But, however, I was going pretty deep into the backcountry. And, the Nez Perce National Forest / wilderness, Bitterroot Mountain area, and just vast wilderness, and pretty deep in there. And if it went from a survival exercise to an actual survival situation, yeah, I want something to take game. And obviously had my EDC, handgun, fixed blade knife, my normal EDC stuff, tourniquet, but I brought a .22. One, because it's light, and two, because I wasn't planning on actually shooting animals. But I wanted to see how viable that was. And I almost immediately regretted not bringing the shotgun. Normally, when I do this kind of stuff, I'll try to go at a time of year when I can actually put meat on the table legally and go out and survive in the backcountry on what is taken. And I usually take a shotgun. And this time I brought a .22, and I almost immediately regretted it. I mean, almost immediately. Because I knew that the stuff that I was seeing I could take with a shotgun, but I couldn't take with a .22. Almost immediately, striking off on the trail, jumped a beautiful, mature male pheasant. Delicious. There's dinner. And then shortly after that, I think 3 ducks. And this is just in the first little bit of the hike. So I could have my whole day's calories and meals right there. But they were flying, right? And not that I can't shoot stuff out of the air with a .22. I've certainly done it. But calling those shots, I don't think that would be very likely. But with a shotgun, almost certainly. And I'm not going to go into every situation that happened, but almost certainly and almost immediately I regretted not bringing the shotgun. However, I got to thinking about this when I was around camp. Once I had made camp, I made a poncho hooch and was making a fire, recording some content for you guys, resting from the long, arduous ruck march. And I made camp. And I think that is the time where something maybe lighter than a shotgun. Because I did spend a little bit of money and got an out-of-state temporary 3-day hunting license, which, again, whether you should have to pay to catch fish or not, I did, because whatever. So I had a temporary fishing license. So I was fishing around camp because I camped around a beautiful, clear river. Drink out of it, fish in it, beautiful. And while I was fishing, I had that .22 slung on my back. Also walking around making camp, making shelter. And here's the thing. If you're living that neo hunter-gatherer lifestyle, targets of opportunity are important because you're not going to be hunting all the time, right? It's not a hunting trip. There's other stuff you have to do, right? You have to make shelter. You have to, or you don't have to, but likely you're going to want to cook food, right? I have no problem eating game animals raw. I've certainly done it. But in general, I like to cook them. I prefer cooked waterfowl to raw waterfowl, and I prefer cooked venison to raw venison. Not that I won't eat it raw if I have to, and not that I don't even enjoy that sometimes. But I usually prefer it cooked. Those kind of tasks, setting up camp, making a shelter, fishing, right? They might afford you targets of opportunity with a weapon. And for that, this light, handy camp carbine, I started thinking about that and thought that would be really handy. Now, what I had was a 22, and a 22 is a decent camp carbine. And targets of opportunity, I could have taken a couple of doves had it been legal. There were several doves, and if you've been out in the bush or if you hunt doves, there's a certain time of the evening where they kind of come in, and you'll get a group of them that'll come in, or maybe 2 or 3 groups in a short period of time, and they're pretty much done for the day. Unless you've got a dog and you're hunting doves and things like that. But doves and some other small edible birds that are food came into camp. Something like that where you can put a little bit more protein on the table. Or people around camp that, if you're doing this, I did this solo, if you don't count Almighty God, He's always with me, and the Rhodesian Ridgeback Alexander Hamilton, but pretty much solo. But a lot of times if you go out camping, you'll be doing this in a group. And you may be doing it as a group extended hunting expedition, but perhaps not everybody that goes to camp is hunting actively, right? You might have the old timer that's there that just likes being around camp. His hunting days, he's decided they're pretty much over. Doesn't want to be sludging up and down, thousands of foot of elevation change, trying to get an elk or a big muley or whatever the case is. Or you've got women and children that are around that are old enough to be responsible with firearms, but they're not there for the hunting. They're out there just for the camping experience. Well, as any big game hunter will tell you, some days just aren't that successful. It's one thing if you're just going out for fun and you got coolers packed full of food, you're glamping. But if you're relying on that food, that wild food for actual calories, then somebody around camp with a little camp carbine, that's a pretty good thing. And if they're around camp anyway and they can supply more calories, that's great. And if you apply that to a survival situation where it's a really high return on investment as far as calorie output. If you're not talking about sitting on a deer stand, over a pile of corn, which I'm not putting that down, but if you're talking about hiking mountains out west, like the Bitterroot Mountains in the area that I'm at, that's a high caloric output, and you might do that for a while before you get an elk or a deer. It's a low ROI for the people around camp to be able to have a way that's handy and light enough on them to be able to stack calories. You wake up in the morning, you have to go to the bathroom, you grab that little camp carbine, you go out and, you're by a body of water, a little pond, or you look down at the river and there's a duck. Well, there you go. Or a goose, or a grouse. Or don't think this can't happen. A deer walks right outside your camp and you get up and look up and you look over at the campfire from last night, and 50 yards on the other side of that, there's a deer standing there. Right? Those kind of things can happen. A camp carbine, I think, is a useful tool for this, for when it's legal and you're doing it just for long hunts or those kind of camping scenarios. Or if you extrapolate that out into an actual survival scenario, like times get tough, like a second Great Depression or something even worse. Maybe it's a whole collapse, maybe it's a half collapse, maybe it's a partial collapse, where you can't rely on the grid or infrastructure, long lines of 18-wheelers to bring food to your little mart of whatever kind it is. And you're maybe completely or partially relying on what I would call neo-hunter-gathering, fishing, foraging, hunting, to put meat on the table. And maybe you have left your city, urban, suburban domicile and have gone out to a more remote place. These little camp carbines, for that and for defense, I think they have some legs as a good survival, putting calories on the table and defensive tool. Also for other critters that might come into camp. You get your raccoons, you get your possums, those things. One time when I was doing one of those backcountry hunts for elk, and last time I was a resident of Idaho, staying in a wall tent, and it was a couple of us guys going out as a team, because that kind of helps when you're hunting out, going out as a team. Not that I haven't gone solo and taken elk solo, but elk's a big animal. When one of the guys takes an elk, you can get several guys to pack it out. That's pretty nice. Elk are heavy. Anyway, we were out on this remote elk hunt. We were outside of Atlanta, Idaho. And if you talk about remote, like Atlanta, Idaho, the quote-unquote town, It might have a residency of 10 people, I'm not even sure. But we were outside of that. We were in the backcountry. We were in the wilderness. And we checked the tracks of the snow in the morning, and a bobcat had come and come right up to the door of the tent, and obviously there's not snow in the tent. So whether he actually came into our tent and got food, we're not really sure, but he definitely wasn't scared of our tent or us sleeping in the tent. For things like that, a nice handy little camp carbine for many situations. So I think I've laid out the merits of the camp carbine. Thanks for listening to that, but I wanted to lay out the bona fides for why you might want a camp carbine or consider a camp carbine. Now, let's look at a couple of things I would consider maybe not necessary, but good for an ideal camp carbine. Because if you have bugged out and you're making camp, and you're probably going to have the gun that you have, right? If you're the main provider and protector for your group, your MAG is the term in vogue now, mutual assistance group, your family, your tribe. If you're the one of or the provider, protector, putting meat on the table, defending, you're likely going to have a different gun. But for a specialty role, for once you're in camp, or for the people, or for one person to have designated as the camp carbine guy, or perhaps you plan on getting there in a vehicle and you have room for multiple guns, this camp carbine. What would I consider, if you could make an ideal, or several options for an ideal camp carbine, what would I look for? Okay, number one on this camp carbine concept, lightweight. Because if it's not light, you're just not going to have it on you. I know you'd be like, you just need to man up and carry it. Well, I'm just saying from a realistic standpoint, if it's too heavy, you're probably not going to. For instance, when I was out fishing, was getting into some smallmouth, having some success fishing in the evening, I had that 22 slung across my back. It was very, very light. If that had been, I'm just going to be honest, if it had been, one of my go-to shotguns, a Benelli M2 or a Mossberg 590S loaded up, probably not enjoying that. Probably, I'm going to be honest, just would have leaned it against a tree. And then when something comes in, I may or may not be able to grab it in time. If it's slung and you practice going from a slung position to a good offhand or kneeling shooting position, that ups your chances a lot. And not all the time, right? Sometimes a dove or a quail can just run out into an open spot and then you see it and then it runs away, and you probably aren't going to get that anyway unless you're actively on point with the shotgun at a ready position. But it greatly ups your chances if that thing is slung and you practice going from a slung position to a shooting position. That being said, a shotgun is so heavy I probably wouldn't have been fishing with it on my back. Likewise, that a lot of, preppers, survivalists go to long gun, that, Springfield M1A. And I like the M1A. I probably should do a whole episode on the M14 M1A. M14 was actually the first rifle I ever did competition with. But the thing's a pig as far as it's like a full-grown swine. It's a heavy rifle, right? You're probably not fishing with that thing slung. You're probably not making tent stakes or setting up a hooch or whatever with that thing. The reason why when you do that kind of stuff in the military with your full-size rifle, you have the rifles leaned up in a stack in a teepee, and you have one guy on guard and the other rifles there that everybody can go run and grab if somebody invades camp. Because you have stuff to do. You're trying to set up a tent. You're trying to set up a shelter half. Dig trenches to go to the bathroom in. All the things that go into making a camp. You're probably not doing it with rifles. It's just not feasible. You're going to dig a hole with the rifle. So anyway, that's where the camp carbine kind of comes in. So the number one criteria, lightweight. Going to want it lightweight. Number two, for me, I would want it quiet. And quiet is a sliding scale. I'm not talking about a suppressor. I don't generally want a suppressor for this because then it's not going to be small, light, handy. In general, there are some exceptions. There's like the Sparrow cans and things. I have experience with them, but I don't want it for this. It's going to make it bigger, longer, and it's not just the weight, it's also the length and stuff. I don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze. Even without a suppressor, I did a whole episode on shooting quiet without a suppressor. There is a sliding scale. I'm not telling you to go out and shoot without ear protection, but there's a sliding scale on rounds that you can shoot that are really, really loud, and rounds that you can shoot that are less loud, and some that are downright quiet. Quieter than a lot of rifles will be with a suppressor. And you can get that kind of ammo without a suppressor. Anyway, did a whole episode on that, quiet without a suppressor. We'll get into that later in this episode, but I want quiet too, for the reasons that if I am out and I have guys hunting, or I'm out hunting and somebody's in camp, I don't want that sound to carry if I'm trying to not scare every animal away that I'm trying to hunt that's far outside of camp. I want it to be quiet. For that reason, if you extrapolate that into a survival scenario, you don't really want to give away where your camp is. And if you're a big-time hunter and you've ever been out during hunting season, even somewhere remote, somebody cooking off a 30-06 or, let alone like a 300 Win Mag, you hear that thing for like a mountain over. Probably don't want something that loud for the camp carbine. If it's what you have, We're talking about an optimal camp carbine. So I'm going to want lightweight, handy, quiet. The next one's a little bit trickier because it may depend on you and your environment more so, but I want it to be able to handle likely food sources that I'm going to encounter and or dispatch pests that get into camp. And I want it to not do so much meat damage that I can't eat the thing if it's a food animal. Like a 45 ACP carbine would be quiet, but I probably don't want to shoot a dove with it, right? Like, you get to that point of diminishing return. And here's where you may want it big enough to take out that deer that comes into camp. But then how do you put that in the weights and balances where it can reliably take out a deer, but you're not going to destroy that quail that you want to eat, or that robin, or that starling? And don't think that you can't get so hungry you won't shoot a small bird and eat it. How do you weigh those two things in the balances? Anyway, that's the criteria. And we'll get into the picks now. After almost 21 minutes. We're finally going to start talking about actual gun models. The number one easy, low-cost choice for this that'll cover most of your stuff is the Ruger 10/22 Takedown. A lot of people, a 22 is like their go-to survival gun anyway. It would be an okay camp carbine. I have a Ruger 10/22 Takedown. It's not my first choice for a end of the world apocalypse long gun. It's not my second choice. It may be my third choice. It's not a bad choice. For a lot of people, it would be their first choice. And situational dependent, it might be my first choice. But Ruger 10/22, they're not crazy heavy. Your standard Ruger 10/22 that's been around for decades is proven it's 5 pounds. That's about the limit that I might choose for this. 5 pounds. You could go with just a straight Ruger 10/22. I would really recommend stainless. But just that 10/22. If you want the takedown, I like the takedown. If you wanted to go Gucci on it, and not just because you want to trick something out, but really, Tactical Solutions barrels makes some really good, lightweight, accurate barrels. There's a lot of aftermarket. You could go down the aftermarket road on this, but if you do, beware of the weight. Don't put so much, astronaut, space age accoutrement on this gun that it ends up weighing 7 pounds, because then you're probably better off with a different gun. But if you want the cheap, easy, effective solution, just a 10/22. It comes with usable sights if you just wanted the iron sights. If you train with it and you know you're dope, you practice shooting standing, kneeling, especially those two for this situation. Probably a pretty effective camp carbine for the small animals. But I think there might be a better option for this, and I've never owned one. Perhaps I will one day. But the AR-7. The AR-7 would be pretty cool for this. And here's why for this scenario. 2.5 pounds. 2.5 pounds. And that's a semi-auto 22. And I don't think it's built nearly as robustly. I don't think it's nearly as ergonomic I don't think it's nearly as robust or as shootable a platform as the Ruger 1022. However, it weighs 2.5 pounds. Again, 2.5 pounds. That's half the weight of the Ruger 1022. That's so light, you could have your main go-to long arm, and you could pack that, 2.5 pounds, and don't let your bug-out bag get too big. But 2.5 pounds, you might want to consider having that, even if it's not you, having somebody else pack that in. 2.5 pounds, and that's so light. If you have a usable sling on it, which for something that light can literally just be a piece of 550 cord, you get a semi-auto camp carbine. And that was developed as a survival rifle, the AR-7 survival rifle. And it's lightweight, and I think for this, that's a big advantage. Again, I don't think they're the best 22. I don't think they're the best training 22. I don't think they're the most shootable 22 out there. But I think for this, you're not talking about shooting a ton of rounds. You're talking about shooting enough to be good with it and familiar with it. And if you're a good rifleman, you're generally a good rifleman across platforms, assuming you know your dope and those sights and things like that. A really good choice for this. And you might be thinking, what about the M6? And I should do an entire episode on just the survival rifles, like the military survival rifles. Now this is pretty cool in that it's commonly, you would probably get this in 22 long rifle over 410. So you get that 410 capability too. I don't care what anybody says, a 410 with a proper like Bernanke slug is good on deer out to reasonable ranges. I grew up hunting deer with a 410. I'll be honest, I don't even know if it was legal back then, but I don't even know if I thought about laws back then. I'm talking about I was a boy. And that's what I had. I had an old Mossberg bolt action 410 that was given to me by my uncle, and that's what I had to put food on the table. We ate game meat. Like, I'm very blessed to have the childhood that I had, but we were poor in the South, in the rural South. I remember walking down when I was a really young kid, walking all the way down to the center of town, which was quite a ways, to use a payphone, because we didn't have a phone. I remember huddling around one room in the house around a kerosene heater, with all of us laying around the kerosene heater because that's what we had for heat, and it was cold. I remember at one point many of us living in a trailer, like extended family, aunts and things like that, and many kids, because that's what we had to do. We were poor. Right? It was not like not putting this down, it's a great recreation. It was not like get on your $10,000 side-by-side with your several $100 Sitka jacket. It was take the gun that you had that was passed down to you and go put food on the table. You know, the adults went to work to make money. You went out into the woods to put food on the table. And again, if we are looking at like a second Great Depression or things getting much worse, don't think that can't happen again. So the 410 certainly is capable. It's capable of taking deer, especially with good Bernanke slugs. It's also good for those kind of moving shots. A 410 is a very capable, and I think really underappreciated round on small game. That gun weighs 4.7 pounds, so almost double what the AR-7 does. And here's my rub with that. It's a single shot on both. So you get a round of 22 long rifle and you get a round of 410. And it weighs quite a bit more. And for even less or about the same weight, you could get a Ruger 1022, which is multiple shots of 22. So I don't know if that's a good trade-off there, but it's an option. Now, caveat, they also make it in 22 Magnum and 22 Hornet. 22 Magnum, I think you give up a little bit more than you gain there. You get more power for sure, but again, if you're shooting a quail or a dove, you don't want that more power because you don't want to eat that thing. That's a good varmint round. That's good if you're trying to take out a coyote or even what I would call the medium small game or the large small game. Coyotes, foxes, bobcat, a big coon, a big raccoon. For that, 22 Magnum is great, but for your small game you're trying to eat, which is the main purpose I think for this camp carbine, I think you give up more than you gain there because you're going to destroy more. Now the 22 Hornet is really intriguing if you reload, because you can reload that down. The 22 Magnum is going to be louder, and the 22 Hornet's going to be louder. But since it's a center fire, the 22 Hornet, and you can reload it, you could load it down safely if you know safely reloading practices, right? Don't just cut the powder in half. That's not how that works. But you could, with certain kinds of powder, load it down to 22 long rifle or subsonic velocities, center fire, and have that as a really good spectrum. Like, you want low power to take that really small game, and you want higher power to take that larger game. A 22 Hornet might be a really good choice if you can find a good repeating firepower 22 Hornet. A good lightweight handy bolt action. And I'm not going to get too far into that, because if you're the 22 Hornet guy and you reload for 22 Hornet, you probably know more 22 Hornet light handy carbines than I do, because I'm not that guy. But 22 Hornet is a really intriguing cartridge for this. But talking about moving up the power spectrum, there's probably a cheaper, much more common and useful range of calibers for this. Now, as soon as I started talking about this, or when you saw the title of this, Camp Carbine, if you've been around a while, you're a gun aficionado, especially survival guns, you may be familiar that there is a gun called the Camp Carbine. And as soon as I started thinking about this, I thought about that too. There is the Marlin Camp Carbine. Came out, I believe, or at least was around in the 90s. May have come out earlier than that. But the Marlin Camp Carbine, I wouldn't call it ideal, but I wouldn't call it a bad choice either. I think for the time and the technology, a pretty good option. The Marlin Camp Carbine was kind of this, a light handy carbine in a pistol caliber. And this is long before the hot craze of the PCC and the ARs. It was a light handy, more traditional kind of camp carbine. And it came in 9mm and 45 ACP. Now, 45 ACP, I'm a fan of 45 ACP. I like 45 ACP. I like 1911s. But for this, I think it's in the camp of the 22 Magnum. I think it'll be give up more than you gain, right? I don't want to shoot a dove or a quail with a 45 ACP. My point of shooting it is not just to kill it. It'll certainly kill it. My point is to eat it. 9mm, I think, is a really good choice for this. And again, the technology of the time. I'm not thinking that the Marlin Camp Carbine is ideal for this because it's just too heavy. Looking it up, and I got this from Wikipedia, and when I looked it up, it also says it came out in 1985 to 1999. So a fairly long run there. But it weighs 6 3/4 pounds. That's not a light handy carbine in my opinion. So it misses out on that. I think it misses the mark there. But again, for the technology of the time in the 80s, not too bad. This is where a lot of these things of this, let's say, kind type fall short. 6 3/4 pounds. If you look at the weight of a gun that came out that I was kind of excited about until I actually picked it up and felt it and realized how heavy it was. The Ruger PC carbine. Now, you may be thinking the 1022, well, they make a 9mm version of that in the Ruger PC carbine, but they don't, because that thing is heavy. I don't know why they made it so heavy. Other than a lot of people probably get it just to take it and drive in their car and walk a dozen steps or less and set it on a table and shoot it at a range and then go home. I would not call that a light handy packable carbine. I mean, it weighs more than many AR-15s. It's not light. Likewise, you might be thinking of the gun that just came out from Henry. And I would say no. It's called the Homesteader. And for a homestead, where you're trying to protect, the chickens from a raccoon, or how about the old cliche fox in a hen house? If you're on your homestead and the gun is leaned up next to your back door facing out of the chicken coop and you just have to pick it up and shoot it, then yeah, that's perfectly fine. It's called the Homesteader. It's not called the Camp Carbine. That thing is also heavy. I don't know why they make these things so heavy other than it's just cheaper to do so than to whittle the weight down. But I would think that Ruger could make a 9mm carbine that was like a 1022 that was much, much lighter. Now, there is one I was thinking of lightweight kind of pistol caliber carbines. For this, there is one called the N.R.A Survival Carbine. It seems like a cool carbine. I've never owned one. To the best of my knowledge, I've never even handled one in person, but they've been around a while. They haven't gone away. They kind of have their own little niche thing, which tells me they're okay, because if they didn't work, they probably wouldn't still be around. As a small company like that, you really kind of have to prove yourself. And again, they've been around a while. The N.R.A Survival Carbines. They're better. They weigh in at 6 pounds. And they come in all kinds of calibers. Again, I think for this 9mm. And I should have specified why I think the 9mm is best for this. The ammo is cheap. As far as the PCC goes, like the pistol calibers, the common ones, it is really available. It's lightweight. If you choose good ammo selection, right? If you're not using defensive expanding hollow points when you're trying to take small game, if you're using the appropriate ammo, they're not going to destroy a ton of meat because they're not a high velocity round. Like, they might be bigger in diameter, but it's not like you're shooting, something with a 223 where it can destroy a lot of meat. You shoot with a 9mm, again with judicious ammo selection, it's not going to destroy a bunch of meat, and it's going to be fine as far as the ability to put down that animal and recover it. Also, not out of a handgun. Out of a handgun, they're quite loud, but out of a full-length barrel, 16 or longer inches, they're going to be much, much quieter, especially if you start out with subsonics. Like a heavy for caliber 147, subsonic 9mm, much more of that combustion is going to go down as far as the pressures go. By the time the bullet exits that longer barrel, much more of the powder is going to be burnt, and it's going to depend on load and temperature and many other factors. But in general, again, firearms are on a... It's not like guns are super loud and you should put a suppressor on them and they're super quiet. Like if you take let's say a classic 18-inch Remington 760 30-06, 18-inch barrel, that thing is not exactly because I actually have experience with flashbangs, but it reminds me of a flashbang. They can be super loud. If you take an 18-inch 9mm carbine, it's going to be nowhere near as loud. It's going to be much, much quieter. I think for this, the 9mm carbine makes a lot of sense. Again, that N.R.A, it checks many of the boxes. It's a little heavy. But pretty cool. Seems like the barrels come off pretty easy, so you get the packability there. It's a really cool option, and if you're looking at it for other roles, it also comes in other calibers. It even comes in 357 SIG, which is pretty cool. That's a cool little round. And if you're going to go in the 6-ish pound range for this, I think you might even be able to do better if you don't want to stick with 9mm. Now, you may because you already have a 9mm handgun and all that, but 38 Special 357 for this, I think it may be the best overall choice for this from a pure performance standpoint. Even if you don't reload, but especially if you do. Heavy for caliber 38 Specials out of a carbine can be really quiet. If you hand load them, they can be really, really quiet. 38 Special is not super uncommon. It's not nearly as affordable as 9mm, but it's not uncommon. It's not crazy expensive. And 38 Special is not going to destroy a lot of meat. Again, with the proper ammo and bullet construction, it's not going to destroy a lot of meat. Also, you can move up in these kind of carbines to 357 Magnum. And 357 Magnum is good out of a handgun for medium-sized game. It gets even better when you put it in a rifle. I would say certainly capable out to 150 yards on medium-sized game, deer-sized game. Again, with judicious bullet construction, something like a hard cast 180 grain, certainly good enough. I would even say good enough for elk, and certainly the biggest of black bear. It's a good cartridge. Now that's going to be fairly loud, but again, if you want to be quiet around camp, you could scale it back to the heavy for caliber, lower velocity .38 special rounds. And if you hand load them, you can get them really quiet. And this could be a good crossover if you wanted to do both, right? You wanted to go out and hunt. You also wanted a good camp carbine. And these have been around a long time. I just looked it up on the Winchester website. They still make the Winchester 92. You're probably familiar with the Winchester 94 in 30-30. It's classic. It's iconic. They make the Winchester 1892 that comes in pistol calibers. The best one for this, I think, will be the 38 Special 357. A phenomenal little carbine. A good survival option. Also, if you wanted to do this, not great, not nearly as good as a shotgun or a 410, but they also make the birdshot for this. And since it's not a semi-auto, it should work in there. So if you wanted really close up, like you did see that very small bird, really close, then you could take it with the birdshot. And again, 38 Special, certainly capable and good for small to even large small game, right? Like a 38 Special is certainly going to take care of a coyote, certainly going to take care of a bobcat. And 357 with the right load is certainly going to be capable of taking medium-sized game. It's even going to be good for bear defense inside a camp. It's going to be good if you want to take it out hunting. And it's not a bad defensive choice. I've said that before for like good crossover guns. Like you want a good hunting gun and defensive gun, or you want a good defensive carbine option if you live in a state where your Second Amendment has been severely infringed and you can't have what I would call a normal common defensive carbine like an AR-15. The lever action 357 38 Special is a good utilitarian gun, and I think it would be a fine camp carbine gun for all the reasons hitherto talked about. That ability to be quiet and handy and light. That 1892, it also weighs 6 pounds. And there may be some other options that are lighter. They made a trapper version. I couldn't find a legit weight on that. They make a deluxe trapper version right now, but it has an octagon barrel, which is going to be heavier. So I don't know why they went that way on that, other than the cool factor of it. But you can likely even find lighter models. Rossi actually has been making versions of this for a while, and they make really good ones. And unlike the Winchester, they make them in stainless steel. And I owned one once in 44 mag, and it's one of the guns I sold that I wish I had kept. 44 mag would not be my first choice for this, because again, 44 Special on the low end, I think you're giving up more than you're gaining on the small game end. But my 44 mag Rossi was a freaking tack driver with iron sights. It was an amazingly good, light, handy carbine. I got it for kind of when I was hunting new territory out west, and I was mostly going to do recon, but I might see something I wanted to shoot, and it was great for that, and I sold it, and I kind of wish I hadn't. But a light, handy, pistol caliber lever action, also, that would be a really good choice for this. Now, I'm going to close on something a little unorthodox you may not think of. You might think it's juxtaposed. It's about as opposite from the gun we just talked about, a classic blued steel walnut Winchester 1892 as you can get. And it might be as far as looks and the time frame it came out in. But as far as this role, I think it's another really good choice. Maybe as good for this role. And when I say this gun, a certain subsection, especially one of the patrons I know, is going to be super happy. And perhaps many of you are going to go, it's hot garbage. But I think for this role, it's not a bad choice. And that's the Kel-Tec Sub 2K. Hear me out before you dismiss it. I don't think it's as versatile 9mm as 38 357 from a pure performance standpoint. However, if you already are carrying a handgun in 9mm and you're doing this kind of thing, it makes a lot of sense to have a 9mm carbine. It's going to do fine on small game. Also, you're gaining quite a bit of power and velocity in a carbine over a handgun. And it, again, with proper bullet selection, right? You probably don't want to use your normal 115 grain expanding ammo, Spear Gold Dots, which is a great choice for many applications, but not for this, for kind of the hunting, putting meat on the table side of it. But with proper ammo selection, like a hard cast 147 grain, that's certainly capable on medium-sized game. I've been blessed to take many an animal. I like handgun hunting for the challenge of it. I've taken many a deer with 9mm, 40, and 45 ACP. I have. Certainly be much easier to do that. I did that for the challenge. If I was doing it to put meat on the table, I certainly would have no problem doing it with a carbine in that. The Kel-Tec Sub 2K has been around a while. It's proven. And here's the thing. It's lightweight. We talked about that arrow weighing 6 pounds. The Kel-Tec Sub 2K weighs 4.25 pounds. That's lighter than a Ruger 1022. Also, it takes a lot of common magazines, depending on what kind of handgun you run. The most common one is probably going to be Glock, but they make other models that take other magazines. So if you want that commonality, I carry a handgun day to day. When I go out in the wilderness, I carry a handgun. It makes sense to have something that takes the same magazines. That Kel-Tec Sub 2K, 4.25 pounds, 9mm. Obviously, 9mm is a decent defensive round. It's not the equal of a rifle round. It's not the equal of a 223 or certainly not a 308. But if you're talking about a light and handy thing to have on you around camp, if somebody snuck into your camp, it wouldn't be the worst choice ever. Again, if it's too heavy, if it's an M1A, it's probably getting leaned against a tree. And then you might get caught with your pants down. Literally. 4.5 pounds, probably carrying that a lot more. Probably having that slung and it's not bothering you very much. Also, the Kel-Tec Sub 2K folds. It's a folding gun, so you get that bonus if you're talking about a backpack scenario. Now, as soon as I said that, you may have been thinking about a gun that came out that's very similar recently. The Smith & Wesson M&P Carbine. Also folding. Now, I love Smith & Wesson M&Ps. The handguns. I love them. I have won more competitions with a Smith & Wesson M&P than any other firearm. More than I can honestly remember. And I'm very humbled by God that He gave me those talents. But I have won more competitions with just a Smith & Wesson M&P than I can remember. They're a phenomenal choice for a polymer striker-fired handgun. Made in America, stainless steel. Just phenomenal. However, for this, it wouldn't be a bad choice, but it weighs more. It weighs 3/4 of a pound more, which is more. Also, it's not yet proven. If you've listened for any length of time, you know my 3-year rule on guns being proven. Now, for this, less important if you're going to go out and test it for a year or two, hopefully before the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan. But for this, honestly, as much as I love M&P, I'd probably go with the Kel-Tec because it weighs less. That means I can either carry more ammo or more other supplies. The one thing I think the M&P may have over this is that since it folds to the side and not over the top, it's easier to mount a legit optic on it. You can do those with the Kel-Tec, but it's kind of a workaround thing. So you may want that, and if I was going to mount an optic on this, and I'm not saying you need to, it'd be a super lightweight, like a handgun red dot or something, to not add a lot of weight. But that is one advantage you get with the M&P, but I'd probably honestly go with the Kel-Tec for this. 4.7 pounds, 9mm, I'd go heavy for caliber, non-expanding round for a lot of the applications. 4.7 pounds, it'd be a good choice. I'd either go with that or I'd go with the lever action 38 357. I think that also would be a really good choice. And again, if you want the easy solution, there's probably a lot of merit for the old classic Ruger 1022 or even a lighter version of a semi-auto 22. Anyway, I hope you liked this Camp Carbine episode. It was a deep dive, a bit nerdy, but hey, I assume if you're listening to this, Many of you are gun nerds. Not that you have to be, but hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Gunfighter Life on Camp Carbines. Hopefully you enjoy the podcast as a whole. I am humbled and blessed that you come here and listen. The prime directive of this is to make godly men strong and strong men godly. Hopefully you see your role as a man being able to provide and protect. Hopefully this podcast helps you do that. If you find value in this podcast, you want to help out, you want to support what I would consider primarily a ministry. You want to help it reach more men. You want to help the podcast improve. I hope you'll consider becoming a patron. Patrons also get special insider-only content. I just did a patron-only episode on survival secrets of being a neo hunter-gatherer. Just for patrons. I try and do special stuff for patrons because they support the podcast. I'm thankful to them, and you should be too. If you want to step up and become a patron, mostly because you want to support the ministry, the podcast, but also you get some cool insider content, please consider going to Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. As a thanks for listening through that and listening to the episode, the tactical tip of the day. As I aforementioned, I was recently out doing some survivaling, doing a backcountry bug out exercise. I had just rucked for quite a while. I was sitting down on a beautiful beach and trying to rest the back and the legs a little bit. And I found a nice piece of driftwood. And I thought it'd be nice to make a decent spoon out of this with the pocket knives. So I started carving this spoon. And just kind of one of those things that happened. I cut my thumb pretty good. It was still tore open pretty good last night. And it's been a while. It's just kind of one of those things every now and then I'll rip it back open again. It was a fairly deep cut. Bled like a stuck pig. Should have had band-aids. I didn't. Maybe that's a tactical tip. Just have simple band-aids in your kit. Now, I had a tourniquet. I had, all kinds of emergency medicine stuff. But just a decent band-aid. Like a legit band-aid. After it stopped bleeding the first time, may have stopped it from getting ripped open again. However, I did have duct tape. And here's a tactical tip of the day. If you're out survivaling, you likely have the water purification tablets. I think they're worth their weight in gold. Now, those also could be used to clean a wound. You just don't dilute the water as much. You just don't have such a diluted solution. You can use a concentrated solution to flush out a wound. Right? That's what those tablets do. They kill germs, bacteria. Also, in those, you get some kind of batting material to stop the tablets inside from rattling around and breaking apart. Well, if you've got that material that's covered in that germicidal antibacterial solution, that also can make a really good sterile bandage, which is what I did. That's what I used until I got out of the backcountry, wrapped my finger up in that, and some duct tape, so I don't have to worry about getting a nasty infection or anything like that. And if you already have those water tablets and you already have that in there, that's a good thing to know and use. Like if you get bloody feet because you've been rucking a long way, you could put a little bit of that on there with some duct tape. Give a little bit of cushion, give a little bit of sterility, and a little bit of pain relief if you still got miles and miles to go on bloody feet. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day, that batting material that comes in those water purification tablets, or at least the ones that I use. That's a good multi-function piece of kit there that weighs almost nothing, and you probably have it on you anyway. And again, if you're not carrying those water purification tablets, I think worth their weight in gold. Some of those tablets, not an entire bottle, but some of those are part of generally my everyday carry, my EDC. That's how important I think they are. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. Now, for your tactical verse of the day, many, many times in the Gospels, it says Jesus went out to the desert, to a deserted place, to the wilderness. I'm going to pick one of those places and read it for you. Luke 5:16. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. I'm going to read that again. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. Comments. Man, I encourage you to get out Get wild. Get closer to God. It's good and healthy as a man. Jesus is our example. Withdraw. Withdraw a little bit from this world and from the Babylonian system, and hopefully draw closer to God. Get out into the wilderness and pray. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.